Good evening, Asia. Good afternoon, Europe and Africa. And good morning to the Americas. Welcome to Connecting the Dots, a laser-fired, quick-fire interview on food and agriculture with international experts, where we seek answers to questions all of us should be asking. I'm Ajay Jakhar, Chairman Bharat Krishik Samaj of Farmers Forum India, as well as the Vice Chair of Action Track 2, Shift to Sustainable Consumption Patterns at the United Nations Food Summit. We are delighted to have Sandrine Dixson-Declève, the co-president of the Club of Rome, to join us today. You have been recognized by GreenBiz as one of the 30 most influential women across the globe, driving change in the low-carbon economy and promoting green business. Welcome and thank you, Sandrine.
Thank you so much, AJ, for having me.
Let's begin with a question. You have an exciting solution. Action Track 5 has given an exciting solution where you say community gardens utilizing vertical farming tools for food security. In that light, when I look at it from the farmer's point of view, I see that most of those chronically hunger live in rural communities and are increasingly more dependent on market forces for nutrition. Would you also subscribe to include backyard poultry, kitchen gardens, wet community markets as game-changing solutions?
Absolutely. And I think it's very important as well that we create the right corridors, rural and urban corridors between both communities. Absolutely, we need to ensure that actually those in rural communities are self-sufficient and that they can localize their solutions as much as possible and not be dependent on trade, and ensuring that they really are able to foster their own production. But the same in urban communities, and trying also to create the right market structures so that we can have products going between rural and urban communities as well. So all three of those solutions are fundamental.
Great. We go to the next question. You have another interesting proposed solution, which is e-commerce ecosystem solutions for rural transformation. But were you also noticing in the subcontinent here that we are in India and in other places, that it's leading to big businesses controlling vast majority of the trade in business and making an impact on survival of mom and pop stores? The question is that should we also be discussing antitrust regulation, enforcement, accountability of big businesses? Or is there something like too big is too bad for resilience? I mean, these are questions that, when you talk to farmers, when you talk to small traders dealing with farmers, these are questions that worry them about big business becoming too big.
So let's be very clear that for us in the resilience track, smallholders and small farmers are core to ensuring that actually resilience does continue and is properly created within the food system. So anything that is the small farmer, anything that is helping the smallholder, the stewards of the land for us is most important. There needs to be accountability principles with regard to big business. And we do also need to ensure that we put in place the right e-commerce frameworks to assist small business owners and also small farmers.
That's a very good point, and I'll take that forward. You have, I think so, really a fabulous game-changing proposal. A solution that you have is on universal food access, enacting food as a public good, valuing food not as a commodity but as a public good and human right based on the absolute essentialness of food of every human every day. This is from your proposal, and I think everyone on the planet will agree with this. In the recent times, we have seen, especially in the pandemic times, we've seen greater consolidation of power and money in a few different segments of the food value chain, which is agriculture input companies, aggregators, packaged food companies, e-commerce and retailers. Now, in each of these segments, each of these sectors, a few players have tremendous power over majority of the organized food consumption, supply and production. Do you think this will go against the public good, about food as a public good? Should power dynamics be at the heart of the food systems conversation?
It is absolutely core, AJ. And I would go even further by saying that, again, governments have the responsibility to feed it. And what we have seen actually through COVID is we have to get back to what's most essential. What is most essential for people is access to healthcare, access to food, good food, healthy food if possible, and also access to water, access to all of those essentials that make a person's life and livelihood worth living. We've gone completely in the opposite direction. It's all around big business, profit motives, and using food as a commodity and creating such incredible hunger in vulnerable zones. What we're trying to do through the resilience track is make sure that food, again, comes back to the core of a food system that is feeding people. That's our number one aim. The second is to ensure that we can be resilient to future crises. So the pandemic, but also let's look at climate change and biodiversity loss as two converging tipping points with the pandemic. So for us, food as a universal good is absolutely at the core of what we need to do to make our system resilient.
Thank you. That's really heartening to hear, and the focus on food. One controversial proposed solution that many people will find controversial is tools for accelerated breeding and trait mining. Undeserved crops includes germplasm, sequencing, trait mining, phenotyping, which many producer groups and civil society are finding in variance with solutions on advanced, wide-scale adoption of agroecology. Do you see a conflict here, or do you see this as an issue that could derail the UN Food System Summit, having these together?
So I think you've brought up really one of the most controversial issues, and this comes back to genetically modified organisms, ensuring actually big business survives rather than coming back to small community agroecology and also regenerative agriculture practices. And what we do believe in the resilience track is that we have to bring in the human potential together also with the environmental protection elements. For us, actually, the gene breeding and the GMO argument is a real difficult argument, and it is not one that we necessarily want to propagate. I think we need to really, the jury is still out as to monoculture. We know is quite bad, has been very bad for a series of different, in particular, fragile zones, but has made soil development and carbon stockage as a real issue across the globe. We need to get away from monoculture. We need to get away from genetically modified organisms where possible. There may be in some very extreme zones where it may be necessary. But in most cases, coming back to the land and regenerating the land is the best thing for the land and the best thing for the farmer.
Which, Sandrine, gets me to the next point about another very good proposal that you have in the action track is long-term conservation of food diversity in gene banks and in the field, and sustained diversification of the food basket. Now, taking your point forward on monoculture, do you think that it is time to impose a tax on industrial animal protein production, or a monoculture cultivation border tax as a game-changing solution for produce emanating from monoculture farming systems, as is being proposed in the EU of a carbon border tax? Would you subscribe to such a solution where you try and use financial levers to control monoculture cultivation?
So I absolutely think that we need to get back also to the way in which countries are working together through their trade, and also the way in which they're trying to create a balance between long value chains and short value chains. If we look at short value chains, we absolutely have to diversify, but also for long value chains as much as possible. So when I talk about long value chains, I'm talking about how do we ensure that we actually trade the right goods that are not going to deplete the land of other people in other countries. And to do that, if there's a need for both trade structures that shift, but also to ensure that we have the right taxation structures in place. I've been one of the first behind a carbon tax, but I believe also that entire taxation structures need to shift in order to cost the externalities of the impact that we have from polluting practices, and also from the way in which we ensure that actually there are positive taxation structures for people so that they can have access to food and the right food. So you need to look at the way in which we have perverse subsidies in our markets that are actually subsidizing the wrong things, get rid of those perverse subsidies and shift the revenue into creating the right food system for people in their environment, in their context.
I think so. That's very relevant. And we move on to the next question on access and control over essential food producing resources to promote food sovereignty, equitable land and resource rights, effective and responsible governance, and sustainable livelihoods. Very rightly put in the action track. Now, when you look at farming as an occupation, And you go back to the time of 2008 and 2009 when there was a spike in commodity prices. You saw that there was a cartelization of the fertilizer industry. Prices of urea and potash went up very high. So, and this jack up in prices that some companies do, it hurts farmer livelihoods and it makes food unaffordable for vast majority of the people. Do you think some action, UN action, is required for this, because these are food producing resources? And do you think there should be some collective public good action by the United Nations on this?
So again, if we come back to universal access to food, then we get to the fact that actually ensuring that people have access to food is the most important concern, not the fact that actually companies can hike up their prices when they decide that it's most important, therefore making it difficult for farmers to be able to produce food for people. So it comes back to ensuring that the core is universal access to food. If governments decide that we all have that universal access, then they need to make sure that those companies that are playing around with the commodities market are not actually creating a more difficult situation for farmers to be able to produce, to get the food to the plate or to the people that need it. So I would say, yes, we need to put in place accountability. We know that this is not just in the food system. This is across the board. Look at the vaccine situation that we have right now. We cannot allow for big business to control our lives and livelihoods to the point where actually it's creating deaths, it's creating struggle, and it's making people go hungry.
I think so. That's really very well put. And that gets me to the article that you wrote on hedge funds versus visionary leaders, where we recently saw Danone CEO having to leave because of pressure from investors, where people are looking at short-term business gains often outweigh sustainable, equitable growth, as you have yourself mentioned. So what can industry and policymakers do to encourage reward inclusive, responsible capitalism over high business returns? Can we depend on volunteerism, or do we need regulation? For example, on food, because in Action Track 2 we are looking at food consumption. Do we depend on companies to make better food available, or do we tax unhealthy food? Do we ban advertisement of unhealthy food? What is the combination of volunteerism versus regulation?
So I think we need a series of different measures. So we need to look at the market measures again, which is around taxing externalities and ensuring that we make food at the core of what we deliver to people. So the right taxation structure, market measures, is fundamental. But alongside that, we do have to have the regulation. I mean, I am working right now on a framework called the taxonomy, which is a sustainable finance framework at the European level. And what we tried to do is put down what was actually a green product or a green investment. And we're starting to look at what could potentially be a brown investment. Agriculture, for the moment, has not been included in this system, but it will be. And the key reason that we have that system is to start giving the signal to investors and the investment community that actually environmental, social, and well-governed value chains are where they should put their money, not in either high animal proteins only and only driving certain commodities because that's where the profit is. To come back to the case of Danone and Emmanuel Faber, I'm very saddened at what has happened. For me, this is the perfect depiction of where we have lost the plot in terms of short-term profit making rather than long-term systems development. A real system where we had Emmanuel Faber, for example, talking about regenerative agriculture. Emmanuel Faber that was actually supporting as a CEO unions, ensuring that people were properly paid. But because his profits were not high enough in a short-term cycle, he was kicked out by predatory investment community. And that is a real problem. We have lost sight of what is most important, and we have lost sight of what is real leadership. We need to come back to leaders who want to lead people and who want to do the right thing. So for me, it's a symbol. It's a symbol that things must change. If we are going to fight against further crises, further pandemics, we have got to make sure that we've got a leadership that understands that we are working in a long-term systems shift And we have to have new short-term values that put into consideration that resilience that we need within the system, because we all know that the planetary emergency is the greatest existential risk to all of us.
Sandrine, we are so happy you are doing what you are doing, leading this movement. And my last question, which is something that you have talked about earlier, is reevaluating measurement matrix for growth, for development. For example, on GDP, or even defining poverty at a lowly $1.90 per day. You think it's possible in the next few years to have a new measurement matrix to reward and to punish?
Yeah, we actually, and we're working right now through the Club of Rome, but also in a new big, large program called Earth for All, which is about transformational economics and new indicators to growth. And we can see, AJ, and I understand completely often that the Southern communities are telling us, but hold on, we want to grow in the same way that the West has grown. No one is denying economic development to the South. What we are saying is we got it wrong. We're saying there's a different way to grow, where we can make it much more equitable for people, where we can make it much more equitable within the planetary boundaries. And if we don't find a way where more people are actually brought in within the safety net, have access to the essentials, do not die of hunger, do not suffer trying to get the world's essentials, that is where we have now realized we need a different type of economy. An economy that is looking at social pillars, economic pillars, and environmental pillars at the same time. And we have 5 governments actually that have adopted what we call the well-being economy. And we also have local jurisdictions that are adopting the donut economy. Both are looking at the way in which we can live within the planetary boundaries, continue to develop and to grow, but not at the expense of people. Not at the expense of more equitable distribution of wealth, so that wealth is no longer just in the hands of a few, but actually is properly distributed across different communities.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sandrine, for taking time out to be with us and give us your key insights. I want to thank you for leading this movement on all these important issues. We look forward to more on the report that you mentioned, and thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, AJ, and thank you for all the hard work of the farming community. Really, it's absolutely essential.